Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be able to be with you today. I'm here on the Northern California coast where we are in big wildfire season, but we got a really lucky break yesterday. Our wind shifted, and so the air is much better today here where I am. At any rate, I'm thinking of all of you wherever you are and hoping that you are well and safe. And thank you again for joining me today to talk about teaching writing and rhetoric in an age of misinformation and lies. Today, it seems pretty stark sometimes, the division between truth and lies. It also seems pretty confusing. Is there any truth anymore? Or is everything just constructed and manipulated in ways designed to confuse us? It's the big question, and it's on a lot of our minds quite a bit of the time. So we see misinformation in our headlines every day, pouring out at us, especially on social media, but even in the headlines of semi-respectable newspapers, like the ones that I just pulled from some news sources. Pope Francis said that God had directed him to revise the 10 Commandments. Not true. Canada banned Beyonce after the Super Bowl performance. Not true. Queen Elizabeth took the Obamas off the royal wedding guest list a year or so ago. Not true. All of these are lies, but they all were spread globally through social media and went viral just kind of immediately. So we're getting, I think, a little bit inured, sort of numb to this kind of misinformation, and we need to sharpen up and pay attention, because what is being spread right now, even as we are here today online together, the misinformation that's being spread is very dangerous. Luckily, we can resist this information and we can recognize lies if we learn to follow sound rhetorical device. First, we need to pay attention, pay close attention to what's going on around us, and especially in social media. I know it's tempting to skim things online, but avoid that temptation, especially if the stakes are high. Keep focused on the text at hand with your critical antennas high up. This is no time to skim through material that could be spreading misinformation and, even worse, outright lies. So be skeptical, keep your critical hat on, and learn to read beyond clickbait headlines. You know, those headlines that scream, read me right now, click. Be careful of those. You can recognize them. They're often completely outlandish, and you can see that they are just meant to get you to click onto whatever the story is, and then the story often turns out to be full of misinformation. So you also want to look for unstated assumptions behind claims. Don't just take a claim, there is no global warming, at face value. What are the assumptions that lie behind a statement like that? And then you want to distinguish between facts that you can verify and ones that you cannot. And to do that, you can learn to do what researchers call triangulation. And that means don't settle for one source that tells you something. Unless you can corroborate that with other sources that are credible, do not take that one source's word for granted. You also need to become a fact checker, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. You can do it. You can be as good as the pros with a little bit of work. And finally, I want to speak a little bit more just about what those fact checkers know how to do. And that is read laterally, which is a phrase coined by some researchers at Stanford who did a really interesting study. They asked 3 groups of people: history professors, undergraduate students, and professional fact checkers, to look at 2 online websites, and determine which one was credible and which one wasn't, or whether they were both credible or neither one was. And when they got the results, the historians got it right about 50% of the time, The undergraduates about 30% of the time. The fact checkers 100% of the time. What were the fact checkers doing? They were reading laterally. That is to say, they weren't reading vertically. They weren't just going down the website looking at what it looked like, what it said, what its sponsor was, what it said about itself. No, they closed that browser. They left that browser, left that window, and went to opened another one or two windows on their browser and started to look at what other people were saying about the websites. And instantly, they could see that one of these websites' credibility was called into question by all kinds of people. So they were the fastest and they were the best, the professional fact checkers, and they were reading laterally. So you can do that easily when you're trying to analyze something online. Don't just stay with that site. Leave that site and go and find out what other people are saying about it. So vertical reading is good. You want to read carefully, read closely, check out what's happening, but also read laterally and find out what other people are saying about that site or about the sponsor of the site. And you can save time and do what the fact checkers do. I also want to suggest that perhaps in these times of so much information, it might be a pretty good idea to cut back on social media. I certainly have. I've really cut down on the time I spend on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or other platforms. I don't know if you'd want to go as far as Jerome Lanier, and who says, gives you 10 arguments for deleting your social media accounts right now, right this very minute. I don't know if you want to go that far, but I think you should consider it. Lanier is a very distinguished computer scientist, often referred to as the father of virtual reality. So he's a big proponent of technology in general and the internet in particular, but he has changed his course in this book, and he argues that social media are dangerously addictive, that they are brainwashing us and robbing us all of our free will. He says, in fact, that we're acting more like trained dogs to just keep clicking whenever we see anything rather than thinking critically about it. And so he urges us in the introduction to this book to stop being like dogs and try to be more like cats. He says nobody has ever taken over a cat. So I think he perhaps is making his argument a little over the top because he thinks it's so concerning. At the end of the book, he says, maybe you don't want to delete all your social media right now, but give it a break. How about taking a week off? How about taking 2 weeks off? How about taking a month off and see how you feel? See if you don't feel better and if you're not able to access more reliable information if you question your social media. Also, while we're learning to recognize misinformation, we need to realize that we carry our own biases, and can spread misinformation ourselves. So you need to think about your own confirmation biases. We all have these. We all have ways of looking at the world. There's no other way to be in the world than to look at it in a certain way. Those are our own biases, and we need to try to recognize them as much as we possibly can. We therefore should be especially careful, excuse me, we should be especially careful about sources that we agree with, that just confirm what we already believe. Don't fall for that. Question your own assumptions and your own stances, your own positions. That's watching out for your confirmation biases. And also look out for your attribution biases. We all have these too, which is a tendency to attribute good motives to people we believe that we agree with, and bad motives to people we don't agree with. And a minute's thought will say that that's probably not the best way to become critical thinkers in an age of misinformation and lies. Here's just a cartoon I found that I really like, confirmation bias at work. I've heard the rhetoric from both sides. Time to do my own research. Literally the first link that agrees with you. Jackpot. That's confirmation bias at work, and you want to avoid it however you can. We need to remember also that photos today, it's so easy to Photoshop. It is so easy to manipulate photographs and even videos now. Very, very easy. The sort of deep fakes that we're all learning about. We need to watch out for those. Here is a student from Parkland, Florida, shooting, who is supposedly tearing up the Constitution. Look at that on the right. It's the US Constitution. What she is actually tearing up is a poster for a gun show, and she's an advocate for gun control. So somebody had found that photo, removed the poster, and inserted the Constitution. Easily done. And then that particular photograph went viral online and turned people, she was getting death threats and other really terrible blowback from that particular manipulated photograph. So remember, when you're looking at images and videos, they could be spreading lies and false information too. Here's another one that I really like. You may have seen this wherever you live. Anytime there's a flood, somebody starts posting sharks swimming down streets. Sharks do not swim down streets. They're in the ocean. So this is one that is pretty easily debunked, but it gives me a laugh every time I see it. Now you can work around or work against manipulated images by doing a reverse image search with Google Image or 10i. It's pretty straightforward. Now, I've done it several times myself, and it can give you a kind of a shortcut into seeing what's false and what's true. Or you can check Snopes.com, which posts about manipulated images. You can also learn to look carefully at light and shadows on images. Remember that if something is just dropped down into a scene, if a new image or a new person or a new animals are just dropped into a scene, it's very likely that the shadows will be in the wrong places. So take a good look at that. And most important of all, for goodness sake, use your common sense. If it seems ridiculous that sharks are swimming outside in your street, it is ridiculous. Don't fall for it. Sharpen up your ability to check out those images that are trying to manipulate you. You can also, of course, use some wonderful rhetorical concepts to sharpen your critical abilities. Joe Bentley's concept of semantic gravitation is an interesting one. He says, if you take a word like, let's say, man, and you put other words with it, let's say vicious, ugly, misogynistic, criminal, then that starts to lower that word man in our estimation. But if you put other words like brilliant, a brilliant scientist, a handsome, on top of everything, charismatic, empathetic, those kinds of words, then you raise the concept of man. So you have to be very careful with what words you put with what. And you have to be careful when you're reading things to notice what words are associated with other words and how they either bring a key term like man up or down in our estimation. I. Richards' inner animation of words is pretty much the same thing. Look at what words are together in a sentence. Richards says in any sentence, the thing that's missing is the meaning, because we're the ones that make the meaning by linking words together. And finally, Kenneth Burke's concepts of identification and deterministic screens can be helpful. Burke says that we all want two things that drive us. One is to identify with other people, to be the same as other people, to be part of the group, part of the crowd, the in group. The other factor is we want to be divided. We want to be separate. We want to be individuals. And those two impulses drive a lot of our behavior. So you need to watch out for how people are trying to get you to identify with them, or how they're trying to disidentify from you, and be able to do that on your own. And also to understand that we all have deterministic screens, like the screen on your window. that we look at the world through, and those screens are made up of, according to Burke, of terms, of words and other symbols that allow us to perceive what we think of as reality. It's kind of like if you're watching TV, what's really on the TV screen are little tiny light pixels. That's not what we see though. Our eyes create images. When we look out at the world, we look through a screen of terms that allow our eyes to see reality. And that's how we can know the world. And it's the only way that we can really know the world. The important point is that we have different deterministic screens. We have different ways of looking at the world. So when I'm trying to understand where someone else is coming from, or I'm trying to understand why somebody's trying to manipulate me, I look at their deterministic screen and see how it differs from mine. I want to go back to Aristotle here for just a minute. I don't hold Aristotle in that high esteem. He had some very wrong-headed ideas, but about these two things, I think he was right. The two major reasons for using rhetoric effectively and ethically. First of all, because it lets you get your voice out there, it lets you get your message across if you know how to use rhetoric effectively and ethically. But second, doing so is major protection. Knowing and understanding rhetoric allows you to protect yourself from those who would use language to deceive and manipulate you. And those are the two reasons that I think are as relevant today as they were 2,500 years ago. We need to hold on to those. You need to bring those to your work and all of your classes, and to put those into practice. So I say rhetoric sharpens your critical abilities, and therefore it is important for you. In an age of misinformation and lies, especially, the ability to read and think critically, to identify falsehoods and manipulative statements, to resist them, is a life-saving skill. But equally important in such an age is to learn to communicate with people that you don't necessarily agree with. Certainly people you don't know, that you just run into online. You need to be able to correspond and communicate with those people, even where there are disagreements. So too often, as this little visual indicates, we talk at each other or across one another, not with one another. But there are ways not to do that, that involve learning to listen with empathy and openness. I want to just give a couple of examples. Arthur Brooks wrote an article that I found fascinating, that he told a story of a confrontation between Trump supporters at a rally, and at which Tommy Gunn, the leader of the Trump supporters, invited a Black Lives Matter leader onto the stage. So the rally, it was a Trump rally, Black Lives Matter supporters turned up to confront the Trump supporters. And the leader of the Trump supporters, Tommy Gunn, instead of getting into what could have been a very ugly confrontation, he invited Hank Newsom, who was the leader of the Black Lives Matter group, onto the stage. He said, "You're here and you have a right to talk. Come up on the stage for a few minutes." So when the Black Lives Matter guy got up on the stage, and someone from the Trump support group shouted out, "All lives matter, all lives matter." And Newsom replied, "You are so right, my brother, all lives matter. But when a Black life is lost, we get no justice. That is why we say Black Lives Matter. I think if we want to make America great again, we have to do it together." By the end of his brief remarks, Newsom got applause from the Trump supporters, left the stage, and the rally continued as planned. Afterwards, people who were at the rally and at the protest group got together in small groups to talk. That's what can happen when you don't rush into a confrontation, but you decide to listen. If you can look that up on YouTube and watch the whole thing, which was pretty compelling. I'll just give one other quick example of a young woman from Canada who was spending a semester in Washington, D.C. studying, and she thought she was going to spend all her free time going to museums, going to the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, seeing other cultural sites. But she says she got an unexpected gift when she got to know people that she disagreed with on almost every single thing. Where she was living, she began talking with a deeply conservative housemate, and Vert winced herself when she mentioned that she was pro-choice. She was expecting to get an almost violent reaction against her. Instead, this roommate surprised her with curiosity, asked her questions, said, let's keep talking. I want to try to understand. As Vert caps it up later, left-wing Canadian meets Bible Belt Republican, discusses controversial political issues for over an hour, walks away with a new friend. So you may already have friends that you know you don't agree with about everything. Why not open yourself up to talking to people that you don't agree with? Who knows, you might change their mind, you might change your mind, you might walk away with a new friend. Rhetoric can also help us engage others we disagree with if we learn we take a few tips from rhetoricians, like Krista Ratcliffe, who talks about rhetorical listening. And what she means by that is to listen as openly and intently as you can to what another person is saying. Don't be thinking of what you're going to say next. Really focus on what they're saying. Try to get in their shoes and understand where they are coming from, why they are saying what they're saying. That is rhetorical listening. And it's fundamental if you're going to engage in a meaningful and productive conversation. You can also practice what Sonia Foss and Cindy Griffin call invitational rhetoric. And that means rather than trying to hammer somebody down and prove that they're wrong, you open up to conversation. And your goal is understanding, not winning, not tearing somebody down, but trying to understand. And if you can understand one another, you might find a little piece of common ground that you could then build on as you move forward. And finally, Charles Camosi's practices that encourage civil discourse. These are things we all need to learn from, these listed here. Try to avoid binary thinking, practice humility and solidarity. Don't fall into name calling. It doesn't ever do any good to use words and phrases against other people. And also he says, learn to lead with what you're for rather than what you're against. And that can help you in difficult conversations if you stake out what you're for, but then listen to what the other person is for. Those, I think, are all extremely good strategies for breaking down the barriers between us and trying to move forward together. So, to sum up, in a time of misinformation and lies, what can rhetoric help us do? First, acknowledge that Jonathan Swift in the 18th century was right. Falsehood flies, truth comes limping behind it. But remember that you can counter falsehood with truth. Secondly, trust. Be open and trust. But, as Ronald Reagan famously said, verify. Trust but verify. Third, respect others, but demand accountability from them. Finally, listen openly, listen empathetically, but know when to hold your own. Know when it is time to speak your mind and to hold your own. As always, in human communication, respect, Aretha Franklin's respect, is the key. So I think when we are in a very divisive time, when we are overwhelmed with misinformation and lies, we need to remember that we can learn to resist that, and we can do so with listening, with openness, with empathy, and with respect. So here are a few sources for you, and these slides will be available if you want to write to me. My email is lunsford@stanford.edu. I would love to hear from you. I would love to send these sources to you or to correspond with you about what I have said here. Now, we're ready for some discussion and questions. Thank you so much.